Welcome to Take 2 of the Security Weekly News wrap-up for the week of 31 January 2021. NIST, fake news, Cisco, Azure Functions, Clearview, Uber Drinks, and all the show wrap-ups. Stick around.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week, your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News. As technology continues to evolve and expand, so have the attackers that put our critical systems in jeopardy. Core Impact from Core Security is a penetration testing tool that safely finds vulnerabilities using the same techniques of adversaries, with certified exploits and wizards that guide you through critical pen tests while maximizing the time of advanced testers by automating their routines. With Core Security, you can safeguard your infrastructure by limiting access, detecting threats, testing for security weaknesses, and efficiently monitoring data. Visit securityweekly.com/core security. Do you know where your organization's crown jewel data is, whose data it is, what it contains, and if it's flagged, tagged, and classified accurately? Defense in Depth requires discovery in depth. At Big ID, they help organizations uncover dark data, classify sensitive and regulated data, meet compliance requirements, and take action for data on-prem, in the cloud, and everywhere in between. Learn more about how Discovery in-depth can change the way enterprise organizations find, classify, and protect sensitive data at securityweekly.com/Big ID.
All right, I'm Doug White from Roger Williams University, your host, and welcome to the Security Weekly News wrap-up show. All the shows from this week are starting with on Application Security Weekly number 138. John, Matt, and Mike had John Delarodari on, and John is the Security Solutions Architect at Qualys. That segment was in honor of the movie Groundhog Day, and Monday was Groundhog Day when the show aired. They were looking at the top, and this is a really useful show if you want just a quick review of this, but they were looking at the top 10 most routinely exploited vulnerabilities on web apps with an app security lens. So definitely check that out. That's something that comes up a lot. It always gives you some food for thought if you're running any kind of web app. So definitely check that one out. On Enterprise Security Weekly 215, Adrian, Paul, and Tyler Shields covered the news in their first segment. And in the second segment, Jonathan Cran, the founder and CEO at Intrigue.io, was on to talk about attack surface management and how to frame that, since basically your attack surface is growing at such a ridiculous rate. It started to get kind of tricky to even figure out what do we do and how do we manage this thing. In the third segment, Sunil Yu, the CISO in residence at YL Ventures, joined to talk about the cyber defense matrix, the DIE triad, and how to do security in the future, as well as a startup focuses. So if you're interested in trying to do a startup or you're trying to come up with a new product, it's a great segment for you to check out. And they did talk about some of those matrices. On Business Security Weekly number 204, Paul, Jason, and Matt had their quarterly review of the markets and where to put all your security money, if you have any. They also covered IPOs, funding rounds, and all the financial news. So again, I always like when they do that show because it's helpful to see what's going on in that regard. In the second segment, they explained the Reddit GameStop option trading hoo-ha that went on last week. So I did one on last Friday's wrap-up show. They're doing one. They got more of a business perspective. So if you really want to understand how that works, because it's there's a lot of issues there that are financial rather than security based. So if you don't understand options trading or all how these hedge funds do these short sales and all that kind of stuff, they talked about all that. So it's a good thing to check out. On Security and Compliance Weekly number 60, Kat Valentine, Jeff, Josh, and Scott had on Wendy Nather, the head of advisory CISOs at Duo Security at Cisco. Both the segments were focused on what they were calling the security poverty line, which I thought was pretty interesting. I saw the title of this segment. I was like, what is that? But then they actually started talking about it, and I'm like, oh, okay. So it's basically, how do you measure where you sit in relation to all your peers, I guess, but it was the maturity of your security and organization, because it's more than what you just spend. So if you say, well, we don't spend much, but we have a really mature organization, which is probably not that likely, but a lot of stuff to talk about there. So they did both segments on that. On the Security Weekly News number 97, Jason Wood talked about something that was pretty interesting to me, was about how U.S. court systems are having to return to paper documents. And the reason they're having to turn to paper documents is because of the SolarWinds hack. And, as all of us know by now, that SolarWinds hack is such a dramatic problem, and it was so pervasive that there are a lot of court documents that if you could question their veracity, and you could go to court and say, could this have been modified? Could it have been compromised? So all of a sudden, the U.S. court system take 4 steps backwards, because they had just literally in the last few years started really getting into electronic stuff, and now they have to go kind of in the opposite direction for a while and go back to paper, which is ugh. On Paul's Security Weekly numbers 682 last night. I got to get back on there. I'm sorry. I was planning to be on this week, but some personal life stuff happened, and you know how that is. But it's been a strange start to this year, and so maybe in a couple of weeks when I get some of these crazy things resolved. On the first segment, our own host, Josh Marpet, who's always great, the COO at Red Lion, he was on to talk about the impact of the CMMC standard, which is new, and it impacts how small federal contractors do business with the government. It's a huge issue. It was already a huge issue for small contractors who want to work for the government. I have worked for the government here and there. I still work for them in a certain capacity for a defense contractor, but I mean, the amount of assumptions they make about your abilities. Like, I remember one time getting told that I needed to provide, they were going to send a whole accounting team to audit my accounting process. And I said, well, it's just me. And I throw all the money in a cardboard box. And they were like, oh, well, no, our team will need to meet with your accounting team for probably a week. You need to provide a hotel and all this. And I was like, I don't have an accounting team. And then they said, well, if you don't have an accounting team, you're probably not going to be able to work with us. In the second segment, Bill DeLisi, the CEO at GOFBA. I don't know if you pronounce it or it's just GOFBA. The segment drew on Bill's extensive history. If you know him or you've read his bio, he has a really long history in cyber. And he was going to talk about best practices for internet safety. This is a topic that comes up from time to time on Security Weekly. So it's always good to review about working from home safety, family-friendly internet habits, and all that good stuff. So a nice segment if you want to check that out, make some notes, or even refer maybe some other people to that family members or whatever, because we're always seems like we're trying to explain this to people that are working from home. I was doing that the other day with somebody that's working from home, and they were like, I don't know what this means, and I'm worried about this, and blah, blah, blah. So definitely worth checking out. And of course, they had the news segment. All right. My favorite threat of this week is going to be the rapidly devolving membrane between facts, reality, and false information. No politics, I promise. I'm not gonna go after any particular brand. I mean, there's disinformation from all directions and all sides of all political arguments. And really, this isn't a political issue. That's not my problem. I mean, I've been watching for the last 20 years or so. So, I mean, I've been here the whole time, and I saw the internet be born. I saw it go from being like a text-based bulletin board system to whatever the hell you call it today. The world at large. The biggest problem in this cesspool is that there's not a real way to separate fact from fiction. I mean, think about it. There was a time, and I don't know, and you can argue about these too, but there was a time when you could go to the encyclopedia in the library, or if you had a good dad like I did, and you have your very own set of encyclopedias at home, and they were a lot less sticky than the ones at the library, but you could look something up. And theoretically, these were facts that were maintained by Encyclopedia Britannica and their, extensive library of fact. Now, I do know, and I've learned since then, that history often has a lot of whitewash lies, and that maybe Columbus wasn't such a great guy, and maybe the Native Americans weren't standing there going, oh, come aboard, we'd love to have you take over our lands. And there's a lot of whitewashing and other things there. But at least if you looked up the diameter of the Earth, or the order of the planets, or how far is it to the sun, or any of these things you think about asking when you're like 9, you could kind of feel like it was a fact, right? I mean, and you turn on the TV and Walter Cronkite was, on there going, the war is probably unwinnable. You kind of felt like he was telling the truth. And there was a law back then that required the people that were called news to present the truth in a balanced way. So they were not allowed to throw bias in it. I mean, and I know there's all kinds of politics about that too, but I mean, theoretically anyway, he was supposed to tell you the truth. But that line, of course, has blurred as well, the line between entertainment and news and all that. And, I know, you kids get off my virtual lawn, and I had to walk uphill both ways to a sewer to get to school and, all that for Yorkshireman stuff. But I love the future. I mean, I like being here. I don't want to go back to dusty old encyclopedias and things, but it does lead us to the problem. I mean, let's use Urban Dictionary as an example to stay away from politics. So let's just say that I want to know what a boneless giraffe is. Besides the obvious, and thanks, Aaron, you know who you are. But I look it up bravely on good old Urban Dictionary. And this is dangerous stuff, kids, so be sure and get your parents' permission before you play with Urban Dictionary. But let's just say that the first definition is that, well, a boneless giraffe is a giraffe with no bones. Okay. That sounds pretty reasonable. The second definition says that it's a sex act involving a gymnast, a half pound of saltwater taffy, treacle, and a tamed stoat. Okay. I mean, is that true or not? And I mean, I'm okay with that. But I mean, everybody's heard of that. Yeah. But what if somebody jumps on there and enters another definition and says that it involves a Portuguese language circus troupe, an ocelot, and a honeycomb? I mean, that's in there too. So which one's true? Well, Wikipedia, look at that. I mean, I see Wikipedia cited all the time on student papers, and we try to tell them, you can't just use this one source. So, the first hit you see, and then it's in the paper. Can I buy the domain hothorse.com and claim that there is a secret cabal of food carts selling horse sandwiches all over the Lower East Side? If you just know where to look and on what day? Sure, I can put that up. I can put it on my domain, right? I mean, they can't even make me take it down. I mean, it's a straight up lie as far as I know, but they can't make me take it down because I own the domain. So, I mean, you're going to take hothorse.com from me when you pry it from my cold, dead fingers. But, I mean, this is just the beginning of the problem. It's like, the proverbial tip of the iceberg. The internet was like just built for circular logic, all right? I mean, the whole idea of it is just that everybody can access everything all the time, anywhere. And, I mean, the redundancy of the physical layer is just like a meta image of the idea of circular logic. So if Paul jumps on and tweets hot horse, it's what's happening. Aaron retweets it with a smiley face, and then Jeff says, bah, the only good hot horse sandwich is found in Philadelphia. The next thing you know, Emerald is showing people how to make a Cajun boneless. I mean, think about that. And then it's picked up on the CBS Evening News, and AM radio talk show hosts are talking about the plight of boneless horses or something like that. I mean, pick whatever news source you want, or disreputable or otherwise, and stick it in there, and all that gets retweeted 400 million times. And then Miley Cyrus leaks a nude photo of her eating a supposed vegan hot horse sandwich. Next thing you know, Space Force is searching for Jewish lasers on the dark side of the moon, and the Earth is flat. I mean, that's where we end up. So what's a mother to do? Beats the hell out of me. I think we're going to have to learn to do better and read things with that cynical, discerning eye that some of us have. I mean, back, I remember when the New York Post printed Wolf Boy found in Subway. It did look a lot like Rudy Giuliani. I hate to say this. And that was what people were saying. This was a long time ago when he was the mayor. But you didn't suddenly have anti-Wolf Boy people running for Congress. I mean, it was the New York Post. You knew it was a joke. But, with the internet, we just haven't learned that discerning eye. And my hothorse.com site looks just as good as the New York Post site. So the best thing to do is use Occam's razor. The simplest solution is probably the best. And when that news network says that pansexual space amoebas are coming for your children, you might just want to take that with a grain of salt and, maybe be a little more skeptical about it. All right, enough of that. As the world moves towards cyber warfare and more nation states join the fray, NIST has released a special publication, 800-172, called Enhanced. And I love you, NIST, but and I hate marketing. So this is listen to the title: Enhanced Security Requirements for Protecting Controlled Unclassified Information: a supplement to NIST SP 800-171. But it's an honest title, at least, right? It's no bias. It's just an honest title. NIST warned that the adversary, this is a quote, the adversaries are bringing their A game in these cyber attacks 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can start making sure the damage is minimized if you use SP 800-172 cyber safeguards. I mean, I don't think any of us think this is a new danger or a new threat, and we've all been talking about it for a long time now. But it has been my experience that the more of these kind of official guidelines that get developed, and I know some of you don't like, government and law and all this stuff, but these are just guidelines that NIST has reviewed. It's a lot easier to take your argument in front of upper management, and you can get more support for increasing your security posture. At least that's been my experience. Maybe you've had a different one, but that's been mine. Because I said so is not always going to fly. Cisco RV160, RV160W, RV260, RV260P, and RV260W are VPN routers. They used to call them SOHO devices, but they're designed for small enterprises. So these are cheap routers, and this is just the latest of Cisco's string of woes. But these routers were subject to a list of 7 CVEs. So 2021-1289, 91, 92, 93. I put you can check the article for the whole list through 90 to 1295, where all had base scores of 9.8. So, and again, this was more of the same thing. HTTP requests are not properly validated in the management interface. And as such, a custom HTTP request to the management interface may allow remote code execution. This is the same thing we keep seeing over and over and over again with these HTTP management interfaces. And I'm not even criticizing Cisco. I'm criticizing all of us for not putting those things in a private management network. But 2 additional flaws then were revealed on Wednesday, 2021-1296 and 1297, was on the same series of routers, which allowed directory traversal and overwrites. So that's not good. And then more models, RV016, RV042, a whole bunch of additional models. So if you're using Cisco enterprise, small enterprise equipment, you might want to check this article out. But custom packets on those could allow remote code execution or denial of service conditions on the routers. Then there were additional reports of flaws in iOS XR, which would allow denial of service, and so on and so forth. So 2 big things that the takeaway from this for me. One, whatever you're using, I don't care if it's Cisco or whatever the hell it is, make damn sure that the management network is isolated, because people don't do this. We keep seeing it. And I keep hearing about it, and I'm going, what do you mean you put the web interface out into your company and then put it on the internet with an SNAT? Seriously? Well, that way we could manage from home. And a lot of people did this hurriedly because they were the COVID thing, and they were sending people home, and they were going, okay, you can't come back on site, so we're just going to make this available to you. And they didn't take the time to test this. So make sure that thing is isolated and that it can't be reached by attackers, even if they're insider attackers. And 2, patch your Cisco gear. They were releasing patches for all this stuff, but that's always a big ordeal to try to patch your 35 Cisco devices. Microsoft provides a service called Azure Functions, which I don't like that name. I don't know why. It sounds okay, but I love functions. But basically, this is the equivalent of AWS Lambda, and I love Lambda. So Lambdas, if you aren't familiar with it, and if you watch the other shows, you've heard people talk about Lambdas all the time. Lambdas are headless code, so they're super cool things. And the idea behind Lambdas, of course, is that they were things that you wanted to share. So think about a Lambda being kind of like a GitHub or something from a long time ago in computer science. But today, Lambdas are functions that you want to be accessed by web apps. So they can be accessed by HTTP requests or other APIs that may come into that HTTP space. And but this article is a blog entry from Intezer, who have reported a lot of Azure bugs. And they found this one, and it basically would allow the attacker to escalate privilege and, listen to this, and escape from the functions Docker container. So the Lambda is apparently running in a Docker, and once they did that, they could get to the Docker host. Now, that sounds really bad, and they reported this to Microsoft. The good news is that Microsoft said that even though you could escape the Docker container, the host itself is protected by the Hyper-V boundary. And I didn't know if that meant the Docker host, so the actual Docker, operating, or they meant that the whole system. So they weren't going to get, out to the bare metal kind of thing, which I presume they're talking about even just like at the Docker level. So it would likely, it would likely only affect you. So your Lambda. Follow-ups on this said that the /etc and /sys directories that have been blocked by Microsoft now have limited this attack. But there's a great video in the article if you want to watch them actually doing this attack live. So they actually put up a proof of concept there, so you can check it out. A backdoor Trojan was found targeting the world's supercomputers. The Trojan was found in a version of OpenSSH. The article did say that it was not widespread. Imagine that, because there's just not that many supercomputers, and that it targeted mostly academic and research networks. Well, again, imagine that. Not too many people have supercomputers, so I would guess that it's probably pretty limited. The malware was found by ESET, and it's named Kobalos, which is kind of the Greek equivalent of Loki, the god of mischief. The malware targets BSD, Solaris, and possibly AIX Unix-based system. Obviously, there's other forks that you may be targeted by as well. So Kobalos can provide remote file access, can instantiate terminal sessions, but they said it was difficult to tell what it did since the code that they analyzed contained only generic commands and there was no payload. So it's likely that it's another type of framework and it can be used for remote access attacks. It appears to spread through credential theft. So once it gets on a system, it could, so you installed the Trojanized executable, then it spreads to other systems in your network because it grabs the usernames off of the supercomputer and presumes that those same usernames and password combinations probably exist on other servers in your network, and then it starts trying to spread itself all over the place. Connection options they reported include an open TCP daemon. It can connect to another Kobalos instance and act as a command and control server, or it connects directly through the OpenSSH server port. So there's a lot of, this was a pretty big time little application. Definitely worth a read if you're interested in such things. All the traffic it sends is encrypted. It can act as a client, a server. It was very tiny, very sophisticated. The article has a full treatment of this with a breakdown of everything that it's doing. Clearview facial recognition technology has been ruled illegal in Canada. The controversial company has been collecting and selling face prints for the last several years. They say they only sell them to law enforcement and government agencies, but they have drawn the ire of privacy advocates. And the latest blow to Clearview is that the Canadian Authority Commission, this is a privacy commissioner, found that the collection of data that they have violates federal and provincial privacy laws in Canada. Basically, they said that Clearview had collected highly sensitive biometric information about people without those people's knowledge or consent, and then used and disclosed this personal information for inappropriate purposes. They went on to say that even if the people had given consent, that it would still be inappropriate with that consent on file because of the way they had used this data under Canadian law. Clearview has said that the biggest argument, which sounds like a cop-out against us, but they basically said the biggest argument is that the benefits in law enforcement and national security outweigh the privacy concerns of individuals. So this is like one of those Patriot Act kind of things where it's like, well, I know we're going to have to go around the Constitution, but, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few kind of stuff. They also said they can't be blamed if law enforcement misuses the technology. And the software has been misused. There was a case in California where officers were using it, for various purposes that were not approved. And there have been several lawsuits that claim the AI that is used for this is racially biased and resulted in false accusations of innocent people in Michigan. I don't know, why does AI always go racist? But it does. It's like that's a thing, right? Hildegard malware is a complex attack on Kubernetes clusters, which I can't help it. It sounds like a candy bar. I'm sorry, but sometimes you just have to crack open a Kubernetes cluster for that sweet, sweet chocolate taste. The malware emerged in January of 2021 and is primarily used to launch cryptojacking attacks, but the researchers believe that it may be in the recon and weaponization stage of development. Team TNT Threat Group is credited with the development of this malware. And the malware begins by exploiting misconfigured kubelets and uses remote code execution to get anonymous access. Additional software then downloads, port scans are run, and locates additional kubelets that are on your internal Kubernetes cluster. And then the initial container can deploy crypto miners for Monero onto all the other systems that are managed by the kubelets. And again, the researchers felt that this was in early stages, so, lock those cute little kubelets up at night. Don't let them run around. And finally, Uber is buying Drizly, I don't know how you say that, for $1.1 billion. This means that Uber can now add the option of having alcohol delivered. They were already doing that. But Uber was already in hot water last year for things like leaving to-go cocktails on people on the doorsteps of apartment buildings with notes saying, do not drink if you're under 21 or something like that. And they didn't ID the recipients, which is required by law in a lot of places. Now, for me, I think we worry about this way too much. Really, I mean, how much time do we spend worrying that someone might get access to alcohol without proper ID? I mean, did your roommate Chet ever buy booze and bring it back to the apartment and everybody drank it, even though that half the people there were in high school? Come on. I know it's illegal. It's terrible. I mean, and I guess it could be a problem when 10-year-olds are ordering old fashions on the Uber app, I guess. I got to admit, it's a different kind of hack than I had, where we had to pay double at the back door of some sleazy bar to get a case of beer without, ID. And they're going, "Are you boys all 18? It was 18 then. And we're like, "Yes, sir, we sure are. Yes." Apparently, food delivery apps, which have had pretty much free range during the pandemic, have had a lot of issues of delivering Harvey Wallbangers and screwdrivers to underage kids. That's what all the high school kids that came to the bar I worked always ordered. They would come in and order things they'd seen on TV. Like, I'll have a martini shaken, not stirred, sir. And when they did order this, I always asked if they wanted a pack of English ovals to go with that, Mr. Bond. But and we didn't serve them. But anyway, it looks like this puts Uber in a better position to make alcohol delivery a permanent part of the Uber experience in the app. Makes sense to me. We're not going to put all these genies back in the bottles after the pandemic. I mean, people are going to want drinks delivered to their house after the pandemic, too. I guarantee it, because, that's really nice. You call a bar and they send over a round of old fashions. Sounds like a good... I want it with a drone. But anyway, I am not coming back to the office. I'm not. And you can't make me. And that's the news wrap-up for the week of 31 January 2021 in the time of plague. Wear a mask and get vaccinated when you can. Let's end this damn thing.